Okay, now we're recording so that those volunteers and interested folks who are unable to join us tonight can view this later.
Great.
So
Good
go
catch.
ahead, Andrea.
Yeah, do you want to switch to the next slide? Awesome. So we have decided to shift from citizen science to community science because we felt like that better described the goals of this program. By doing this, we're hoping to create communities of people who care about wildlife, and being a citizen isn't necessarily a prerequisite for that. So by doing this, we're hoping that our program is going to be more inclusive and more justice-minded, but I also think it makes sense on a common sense level and will hopefully appeal to more people and be a little bit more approachable. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns about the name change, you can always bring that up, Julie or I, but nothing about what you do is going to change. We just have a slightly different name. So that'll be updated soon on our websites and things like that, but all your monitoring will be the exact same.
And another note about if you have questions or comments on what we shared tonight, if you think of a question, you can throw it in the chat box and we'll get to all those at the end, or you can just ask your question as we go, but we would love to hear from everyone.
Absolutely, and you can always follow up with our emails and our Severson contact info. Great. Big picture summary of this season, it was incredible. We covered over 33 of our 45 forest preserves. We logged well over 800 hours, which is just amazing. And we had 271 people participate in community science this summer. This includes both our formal monitors who do projects like bluebirds or odonates and are registered within our system, and people who swing in on iNaturalist and make a couple posts and maybe move on. But all types of monitors are equally important, and we're glad to have so many people involved in science in this county. Now, our first project alphabetically would normally be bats, and I love this project so much. But as Jerry hinted at before, we really didn't monitor many bats this summer. The reason for that is our bat equipment is expensive, and we only have one formal set with the forest preserves. In regular seasons, we switch this out between monitors, but due to COVID concerns, we chose not to do that program this year. Hopefully next year we'll be ready to go. Hopefully COVID will be less of a problem, but if it is, we'll have an ample sanitizing process for the bat monitoring equipment so we can have multiple people going out and covering forest preserves. So hopefully next year we'll get Jerry back out there and we'll monitor some awesome bats. Great, thanks Julie. Next up alphabetically is our Bee Spotter program, which is one of the ones our Girl Scouts helped with, along with Barbara Williams, Joyce, and several other monitors. To monitor bees, all you have to do is take photos of them and upload it to a website called Bee Spotter. It's hosted by the University of Illinois, and it's a really important thing right now because bees are threatened by habitat loss, pesticides, and climate change. So the more we can learn about them, the more we can preserve them for the future. So Julie, if you want to click to the next slide, this is a summary of our 2020 Bee Spottings. And you see a list of the species on the left, and then the numbers with them correspond to the number of sightings per species. We did find 4 rusty patch bumblebees and formally documented them. That's the Bombus affinis on the top. Our most common bumblebee should be no surprise. That was Bombus impatiens, or the common eastern bumblebee. We see quite a few of those, and they're just as lovely as our rarer ones. We also saw a lot of Bombus bimaculatus, which is our 2-spotted bumblebee. So these results were pretty much as predicted. We were excited to see some Bombus sphervidus because those are rare in this area, and hopefully we can get more documents next year.
Can I just inject a question?
Oh, please, go for it.
When did you prepare these charts?
Oh, good question. Last week we started to finalize them. Did you do a dump?
Yes.
Oh. Well, there'll be more findings really soon.
Yeah, I've just piled in some more data there that
awesome.
Was a little late coming for your charts. So
okay, well we'll be sure to update that before we send out the slides so everyone
it's it's just tweaks to the numbers. You only showed one Bombus citrinus, and I think I've just loaded up another 3. So
wow, yeah,
that number will climb. So
great.
it's okay. It all comes out in the wash.
Right.
Thank
That's good to know. This next slide compares 2019 versus 2020. Now, we can't infer any strong causations in here or any strong differences because 2019 was a different year than 2020. We had a couple less spottings in 2020 overall, and we were also not pushing as many people to go out. But then on the other hand, we had a Girl Scout troop come on and monitor pretty regularly. So there were too many differences to draw any strong conclusions from this data. But you can see there were a lot more of the common eastern bumblebee or Bombus impatiens this year than last, and less Bombus affinis or rusty patch bumblebee spotted this year than last. So it'll be interesting to see as we get more solid years worth of data, what the differences end up being. Great, thanks, Julie. Now this is a screenshot of a map we've made of all of our findings for bees this year. And it's color coded based on the species. And Julie, actually, if you click on the map, it should be hyperlinked to the live map. Awesome. And when we share this via email later, you'll be able to access this link too. But it's kind of neat. This map allows you to zoom in and look at specific forest preserves and see what bees were spotted where. Kieselberg is where a Girl Scout troop was monitoring. And there's your data represented live on a map. And if you wanted to, you could select certain layers and see certain species where they're at. So just make fun. No worries, Julie. But again, we don't have enough data to draw any strong conclusions about, oh, well, bees were definitely spotted in savannas, not as much as prairies or things like that. But we're hoping to build up that database and be able to do that later on. And I have a couple of goals for BeeSpotter 2021, and this is something we were able to pilot with our Girl Scout troop. That's having some formal forest preserve assignments. I would love to have new monitors who are coming in to claim a forest preserve as kind of a home base and make a commitment to try to visit it at least once a month from April to October, and then log their findings in BeeSpotter. Sometimes it's overwhelming for new monitors to have 45 forest preserves to choose from and the ability to go out anytime. And sometimes that amount of possibilities is a little too overwhelming. So this is just a suggestion and a way to get new monitors started with some structure. And then if they find that maybe they wanted to monitor all over the place or for just 1 week during the summer, they can change that as they see fit. But this will kind of be our model to start with for incoming bee spotters. Before we move on to our next set of data, does anyone have any questions, comments, or concerns about our bee data? No? Awesome.
I will just mention that I kind of practiced doing the home base forest preserve with BeeSpotter this summer, and I went to the newly restored prairie and the Stone Bridge Forest Preserve. So there's not actually a public trail there, but I took the same little loop route through there about every 2 weeks this summer, and just looking for bees mostly. It was helpful because I was able to kind of learn what temperature or wind level when I could see more bees. So I got to try going out at different times of the day and at different temperatures. And also it was nice to walk the same path and kind of figure out where flowers were blooming or where the bees were most likely to be. Okay. Our next one is Budburst. So Budburst is a nationwide monitoring program, but it's hosted by the Chicago Botanical Garden. And this is focused on phenology, or the different stages of plant growth. And so specifically, Budburst is interested in looking at how plants are changing with climate change, but also so in different weather stages, how they're moving along in their growth, and then if that is changed with climate change. Yeah, so here we have a chart just showing the 6 species that volunteers observed on Budburst here in Winnebago County. So we have 6 pretty basic common species. And we really just wanted to point out here how we can grow with Budburst as monitors. So here we have an example. One person did monitor a box elder tree at Bowman Park. And so they observed this tree multiple times throughout the year at different stages, and then described those different stages. So you can see in the spring, the leaves were unfolding. Then it began to flower, fruit, and then in October, the autumn leaf color change. And this is just an example of pictures of how the buds are changing throughout the months. And so ideally what monitors could do, or if you would like to do this next season, pick a specific tree or plant. So maybe one that you always pass along your Bluebird monitoring routes, or maybe a plant in your yard, and then take an observation of it about once a month over the summer and upload those to Budburst.
Awesome.
So it doesn't have to be in a forest preserve?
It doesn't necessarily have to be, although we always want as much data from forest preserves as we can get. It's still valuable for the Chicago Botanic Garden to have data from a backyard or a garden. It doesn't even necessarily need to be native.
Okay.
Yeah, great question. But our goals are pretty simple for Budburst for 2021. We'd love to fully launch this program. That was something we were hoping to do this year, but with COVID, we kind of kept it on hold. So we want more monitors, and we want to start an Adopt a Tree program to give new monitors some structure and some support. But with that said, monitors wouldn't have to monitor a tree, and they could do the option of making one-time observations, but it is really helpful to monitor a plant throughout a whole season. So hopefully the future is bright for Budburst. Thanks, Julie.
Great. So now we will move on to our beloved Bluebird boxes. Our first graph here shows the species and abundance of all the birds that fledged this summer. So you can see we had the most bluebirds, which is great. And that bottom line down there is the number of boxes, which is 181 boxes that our monitors checked weekly this summer. You'll see we also had a lot of tree swallows, 160. And we did have 9 house sparrows fledge, but we'd like to point out that that number would be a lot bigger if it weren't for the dedicated monitors who week after week take out those sparrow nests or get rid of the eggs and keep that invasive species away from our bluebirds. So that's a great thing you all do. And our next graph here shows the abundance and diversity by forest preserve. So you see Seward Bluffs has by far the most birds that fledged, and one reason for that is that there are 34 boxes at Seward Bluffs. It was a 4-mile round trip hike for Sienna and I each week to visit all of them. Yeah, and there's also many successful fledgings at Severson Dells and at Ferguson and Fuller as well. In Deer Run, yep, had a lot of tree swallows there. And this is one more graph to show the number of birds divided by the number of houses in that forest preserve. So now you see that Seward Bluffs line go a lot further down. And we see that really Fuller and Roland Olson had very high activity and fledging. And Roland Olson was really successful for those bluebirds. That was really wonderful.
And one of the reasons why we did this division was some preserves like Seward Bluffs have a ton of bluebird boxes, and some like Mactown might have less. And so we got this average to kind of show how many birds there were per nest box to even it out a bit more. Thanks, Julie. Awesome. And we started to make a very casual map of the number of bluebirds fledged in certain regions. So for example, the big 44 down there is at Severson. This is an interesting thing that we want to start to explore. Right now, this is obviously only 1 year's worth of data, and this is very gross, it's very general, but hopefully soon we can start to ask and answer questions like, do we see more bluebirds on average at places next to industrial agriculture or places that are even more remote and natural? Is there any relation to the amount of hikers coming through an area and the number of bluebirds that fledge and things like that? So we're really excited to start to get into mapping and trying to draw some conclusions about locality and the number of bluebirds and other nesting species fledging as well. Awesome. Now we have some goals for 2021. We always want to train more monitors, especially for people who start to want to partner up with somebody or have someone to help them out. We want to make sure that if a monitor who's been at a site for a while wants support, they can get it. And while we have most of our sites covered at this point in time, we recognize that it's good to have a bunch of monitors ready to go who are trained and capable to be substitutes or assistants as they come into their own forest preserves over time. The constant push for bluebirds is to always optimize box locations. For example, Oak Ridge Forest Preserve that Mark Grove worked so tirelessly to monitor hatched no bluebirds this year, even though Deer Run across the river had a ton of bluebirds. So maybe it's a matter of shifting the direction of these nest boxes, moving them to drier areas, or things like that. So we're always grateful for the input from our monitors on which types of boxes are successful and which ones might need to be moved or removed entirely. And then on the administrative end, Julie and I are looking for ways to optimize our field forms and our data entry process because it takes several man hours and even weeks of work to enter everyone's data, which is important and good, and we value that data. But we're trying to find ways to make it a little bit faster so we can spend time improving the crop of bluebirds and less time clicking away at a computer.
Yes. Are there any questions about our bluebird data before we move on?
Julie, was there a slide about 2019 versus 2020?
Ooh, probably.
Let's see.
Here we go.
Here it is. This is a short comparison of the 2019 versus 2020 findings. This year was a much better year for bluebirds than last. And I saw so many times on our Facebook group last year that, this was a bad year for bluebirds between the gnats and the cold weather at the beginning and the rain. It was just rough. So it was good to see the bluebirds coming back up. You'll also notice that there were a ton of tree swallows this year. And this anomaly is probably due to the fact that Seward Bluffs had site coverage this year and it didn't last. And Seward Bluffs had a ton of tree swallows. So again, there are some discrepancies year to year with every project on number of monitors and number of locations covered, and that can explain some of these blips in our data.
All right, we're on to our next section, which is our favorite finds from our butterfly and odonate monitors. We don't have a formal database program for these observations. We just have Facebook pages where monitors create community by sharing their finds, helping one another identify. And most of the monitors that take photos also upload those to iNaturalist.
And a couple of monitors still use Polarbase and a couple other programs, but we recognize that a lot of our monitors are just free-forming the odes and the butterflies. So Julie and I selected some of our favorites, but there were a lot to choose from.
Yes, it was very difficult to choose the top few, but here are just a small sampling for everyone. So first we have a unique butterfly found by Mike Groves. This is the Baltimore checker spot, and he found it at 4 Lakes in June. And next we have a male eastern pond hawk. This was found by Jerry Moores, and he said that it seems like the ode is showing his teeth And Jerry found this in June at Sugar River, which is just an awesome picture he got. And here's a special find from Joyce. She actually has been looking for the Swift River Cruiser at Deer Run for the past 5 years, and for the first time found it there this summer. So that was a wonderful find for Joyce, and a gorgeous photo of his eyes up close.
Yeah, look at those eyes. Wow.
Yeah, and the detail is amazing.
And look at his little happy smile.
The yellow?
Yeah. Here, look at the little smiley line. That's great.
Great job, Joyce.
Jackie captured this stunning moth that I'm not going to try to pronounce live. And the color was just exceptional, and this was right outside of her home. So what a good find, and just proof that nature can be found anywhere. This beautiful sedge sprite was captured by Barbara. And Barbara, if you want to chime in anything about this find, you're welcome to. But what a great color contrast, and kind of a special species, right?
Yeah, it is. I was surprised to find it. They have out at Cedar Cliff, they have several just little bitty ponds out in the low spots where water runs off through the prairie. And this was in some kind of sedges right near one of those little ponds. It's a tiny, tiny damselfly. It's about the size of a bobby pin. And so they're very easy to miss. And there were several of them there. So it's a beautiful little creature and kind of unusual in this county. So it was nice to find it.
Yeah, great find. And it's exciting to see Cedar Cliff is a new forest preserve, and it's boding well for our insects. Awesome. And this is a neat flag-tailed spiny leg. This was spotted by Jackie at Bowman Park. And she had shared that she found this funky little guy and was trying to identify it. And thanks to the help of Barbara and Joyce, she was able to. And it's just wonderful that we have a community of people trying to support each other, and in turn they support our animals as we're able to better identify them and understand them. And Joyce captured this awesome photo of ruby meadowhawks in wheel. And Joyce, if you want to chime in anything about this find, you're welcome to, but she found these at Deer Run, which is kind of her stomping grounds.
Okay, yeah, so ruby meadowhawks are kind of, they're hard to distinguish between, there's 3 of them that are very similar, white-faced, ruby, and cherry-faced. And so after this photo, I had to, take a good look at some particular aspects of the male dragonfly or the female to make sure it was a ruby. And we have, no, Barbara has found a cherry-faced in Winnebago County, but we've just found the one that I'm aware of. So yeah. It's those 3 are a really confusing group, but the rubies are fairly common, but the cherry-faced are not. So very similar.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
All right, so we're on to our next section, which is calling frogs. Lots of love for this. One thing that's exciting about calling frogs this year is we monitored many more forest preserves than were monitored in the past for frog calls. So we have more data. Awesome.
And that's something I always love to hear is more data. This big set of data is a map of our findings for this season. So each of the columns represents a different species, and each of the rows represents a spot where we were monitoring. The numbers 1, 2, and 3 correspond to our sampling runs, and this is a really important aspect of this project. Each sampling run is a set amount of time that we anticipate to hear certain species. For example, you'd anticipate to hear spring peepers in the first run, some toads in the second run, and things like bullfrogs in the third run. One of the big reasons why we're doing the Calling Frogs survey is because we're trying to learn when our frogs are calling and mating, and if that stays similar to temperature, length of day, or date. And of course, this all goes back to climate change. And if our frogs are going to shift their mating periods with climate and warmer weather, or if they're going to remain in the length of day. So with that said, each of these numbers in this table correspond to the sampling runs where we heard those species. So for example, at Deer Run, we heard chorus frogs only in the second window, but at Four Lakes, we heard them throughout the whole season, so all 3 sampling runs. Things like the American toad were seen at a couple of forest preserves, and things like the wood frog were only heard at 1. So this is really fun to dive into, and now as we have more forest preserves covered, we'll be able to make some stronger conclusions about population trends. Great.
Andrea, can I just mention something as far as Deer Run? I've seen tons of northern leopard frogs there.
Yes.
So they are very common there. I guess they just weren't picked up in the frog calling.
And that's a really good point. So this is all based on sound and not sight. And so for those unfamiliar with this project, we go out at night, and at certain spots, we listen to frogs. And even if we hear ambient frogs in the background, if they're not in that specific body of water where we are monitoring, we technically can't count them. And that's just to keep the integrity of our scientific data, but it definitely means we have to put blinders on, and it's not reflective of the whole site, like Joyce was just saying. So I only picked up on northern leopard frogs once at Deer Run, but that's not to say that they're not abundant there, for sure. So this shows species diversity by location. Oak Ridge only had chorus frogs from what we heard. We know there's probably other species out there, but that's all we heard. Four Lakes and Sugar River had a ton of diversity. And so this doesn't necessarily correspond to abundance. We just marked them off if they were found there or not, if that makes sense. So it's not like we heard 50% green frogs and 50% chorus frogs at Hononegah. Those were just the 2 species we observed there.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So we found no observations at Trask Ridge Forest Preserve and Killbuck Bluffs Forest Preserve, which was disappointing. Now, hopefully next year we will find frogs there, but if we don't the following year, we might have to remove these specific sites from our list. We weren't able to find any pickerel, Cope's gray tree frog, fowlers, or cricket toads out there. Or sorry, I should say fowlers, toad, or cricket frogs at any of our forest preserves. But this isn't surprising as these are rare species. It's tricky with the Cope's gray tree frog because they look really similar to the eastern gray tree frog. In fact, they're somewhat indistinguishable, but their calls are what set them apart. So anytime we heard an eastern gray tree frog, we would try to record that call and submit it to an expert. And every single time she identified those calls as eastern gray tree frogs and not the Cope's gray tree frogs. So we did our due diligence, but we just weren't able to find any this season. But with this said, it's still incredible because last year we only monitored out 4 lakes and Peck wetlands. So getting as much data as we did this year was so exciting.
Yeah, and another exciting thing was Andrea and I were able to get other AmeriCorps members from Severson and our friends to come monitor frogs at night with us because it was a kind of outside COVID safe activity you can do with friends. So when we did that, it caused us all to be curious about what we were finding, and we came up with some questions. So that's what inspired me to come up with some mini research questions based on our frog data. And these are mini research questions, of course, because we have a very limited amount of data. But one question that came up was if frog call abundance is influenced by cloud cover, because we thought maybe frogs like the moonlight and that inspires them to call or to mate. So we looked at our data and took the number of calls and put that next to what the cloud cover percentage was that night. And across the board, we saw that there tended to be more calls when there was partially cloudy skies. So there's nothing super conclusive there, but just starting to kind of see what our data can do and what kind of research questions could be answered, or what we would need to do to answer research questions with what we're finding. Second research question that we thought of while monitoring was if frog call abundance is influenced by precipitation in the last 48 hours, which everyone marks down, because we thought maybe frogs like it when it's wetter, or maybe they don't. So when we looked at our data, about half of the time that frog calls were heard, there had been precipitation in the last 48 hours. So it seems like there's no correlation according to the data that we got. Again, to say there's no correlation is there's no statistically significant data to support that, because we're limited in what we found. But just to kind of spike your curiosity there, we looked at those mini research questions.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Julie. So for 2021, we would like to see more preserve coverage. And what I mean by that is Julie and I covered a lot of the preserves this year, which was awesome. And it was a good chance for us to get farther into these forest preserves, figure out where these stakes are, and make sure they're ready for monitors in the following season. So we'd love more monitors. We also want to establish monitoring pairs because we recognize that going out into a forest preserve alone at night can be potentially dangerous or maybe just uncomfortable for some people. So we want to offer the opportunity to have a partner that you don't have to find yourself for future monitors. This will also improve our data validity to some degree because it helps to have a second ear listening and confirming what you're hearing. So we'll see what that has in store. And of course, we have monitors who are comfortable going out alone in forest preserves, and that's excellent and good. But we might have someone come along who wants to try it and wants to start researching frogs. We want to make sure they can do that and feel comfortable at the same time.
Are there any questions about our frog data before we move on? Great.
Oh, I do have one question. I'm sorry.
No.
So yeah, I've never seen or heard a wood frog, and it's at Pecatonica Woodlands. Yeah, so how many times was it heard? I mean, do you think it's more common there, or what is it about the wood frog that it's not at some of the other sites? Is it a more rare one?
Wood frogs are more rare, especially in this county. They like to be in wooded areas next to cool, clear water. So Pecatonica definitely checks that box off. We have heard them in the past, or there has been talk about them being heard there in the past, but not this kind of formal documentation. So I know Mike Groves has heard wood frog there, but this is one of the first times we've had a formal set of data and with a date and time for
Wow,
that.
that's awesome. Yeah, great.
Well, I was going to ask about that too, but I figured I'd wait till later because I see they were found at Pecatonica Wetlands in the third window. Mm-hmm. And my understanding is that wood frog was a very, very early spring caller.
Yes.
And I wondered about what the date was and whether there was really a recording documentation.
Mm-hmm. Yes, good question. I know Allison checked this one off. She's our contact at Peggy Notebart, so it cleared her, and we trust the monitor who got the data. I can't say if there was a formal recording, like a sound recording or not, but the person out there knows what they're doing. So you're right, though. It is an anomaly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's definitely something we want to keep an eye on for future years.
Right.
Yeah. Good point. Any other questions about frogs or the data that we showed? Awesome. And I mentioned Peggy Notebart. That's a nature museum in the Chicago area that coordinates this project for several other counties. So we're one of their counties participating in this broader project.
Great. Well, our next project to look at is iNaturalist, which definitely has the most people participating. You can see here we had in the project Forest Preserves of Winnebago County over 7,500 observations, 1,344 species, and over 12,000 identifications, and all of these numbers are constantly growing almost every day. So that's really great. And we can also see here our top players, people who contribute the most. So that Severson Dells account, that is Andrea, and B. Williams is our Barbara Williams. And you can see that Rob Miller and Batgirl, which is Ellen, who works at Severson, are also highly active in our project. And the most observed species is the prairie trillium, as well as the Virginia bluebells. Those got a lot of attention this spring. We did have some really great rare finds. Recently, the evening grosbeak was spotted at Severson Dells, and we've had people coming in all day long to come and try and see it. So that's great. We also saw the northern harrier, which is, I believe, an endangered species.
Yep, in the state of Illinois.
Mm-hmm. We had multiple spottings of the sandhill crane and the golden northern bumblebee, which were rare and unique finds.
And Barbara, you'll be happy to know that golden northern bumblebee was spotted at Clem.
Oh yeah, sure.
So here, I'm gonna take us real quick to the iNaturalist desktop page to our project. So if you haven't already tried going on this on your own, you can just look up on iNaturalist, the Forest Preserves of Winnebago County. This project specifically is, it has the Forest Preserves logo there. So there's a few of them listed. It kind of gets confusing, but this project, it has our logo. And then you can see recent observations here, and there's our scoreboard again. And you can even scroll down to get to a map of where people are making observations. You can see a lot are in forest preserves, but also in other green spaces in the area. And I can also, you can go here, look at observations. You can search a species. So if you want to see if someone in our project has found something or how many of that species have been noted, you can do that here. Or you can just go to the stats page and see how we're doing as a group. This is also a fun one to look at, as most comments and favorites, and see some exciting posts from people nearby. Yeah, so in case you are interested, you are always welcome to come onto the iNaturalist website, iNaturalist.org, follow this project, and see what you find. Oh, this one. Okay.
Awesome. So I'm always amazed by iNaturalist, and I think iNaturalist is fun because someone can participate without ever knowing that we have a formal community science project for it. So I'm really happy with the number of observers that we have. Some people who go out every week in this county to observe, and some people who swing by on a road trip, snap a picture, contribute to science, and move on. I think it's totally doable for us to get 8,000 project observations in this project in the year of 2021. I'd also like to connect more with local schools because iNaturalist is such an accessible and open-ended community science project. And that will likely happen with the City Nature Challenge, which I'm so looking forward to next year. Awesome. So if you're unfamiliar with it, the City Nature Challenge is an international BioBlitz. It's a competition between cities to log as many wildlife observations on iNaturalist as possible. Last year was our first year participating, and we did really, really well. We had 5 counties participate. So we had Winnebago County, Boone, DeKalb, Ogle, and Stevenson counties. Winnebago County pulled in strong because we have a lot of support in community science there. But hopefully next year we can empower local organizations in the other counties to get a similar pull. In just 4 days last year around Earth Day, we logged 5,612 observations, which is mind-boggling. This doesn't necessarily reflect in the forest preserves of Winnebago County iNaturalist project because this included any green space in those 5 counties. So there were people observing things in their backyards or in parks that wouldn't be logged in our forest preserves of Winnebago County project. But we did find 750 species and over 8,000 identifications were made on our observations to help bring them up to research grade or a higher scientific level. Awesome. We had a ton of people participate, and it was cool to see the Severson staff and ignite our competitive spirit a little bit, but also other people hop in and contribute along the way. And the Prairie Trillium, again, was a fan favorite. Awesome. I was so excited about our success, especially being a first-year competitor. We were the 45th city in the world out of over 300 cities. And if you average just by number of people participating, we were 42nd, which is pretty neat. If you broke it down by climate, we were first in the boreal climate, which is exciting. And they chose to break it down by climate as well because areas like Rockford might have less biodiversity than, say, a tropical rainforest. So this gave us a category where we could really shine in. And I was thrilled that we had 9 partner organizations, and hopefully we can expand that next year. Awesome. Were there any questions about iNaturalist or the City Nature Challenge before we move on? No? Awesome. Thank you all for your help with that. Briefly, I want to talk about the 2020 season and what we can look forward to. One project that we started in 2018, right, but didn't really take off in 2019 was grassland birds, and I'd really like to give that a try again. This is a project to monitor 5 vulnerable bird species that live in grasslands and take a really close look at them and see how we can help them flourish. We want to establish more partnership with schools and hopefully do public events and hikes as it's safe to do so. We put a pause on that this year, but we would like to do it next as long as it's safe. And as always, we want to offer more support for our volunteers and provide structure as it is helpful. And I have some dates penciled in for trainings next year, and monitors don't feel like you have to rush to write these down. These are penciled in and these will be sent out, but we're definitely thinking ahead about how we can refresh current volunteers and get new volunteers ready to go. One new thing is that we'll probably do these all virtually next year for safety reasons. We'll start off with an info session for anyone interested in community science broadly. And then from there, they can go to a specific training on a project that they may be interested in. And this is where they can meet current volunteers who are already participating in those projects and might be open to mentoring new volunteers as well. So these will likely be over Zoom, and they'll be recorded and sent out to people who might not be comfortable with that format or not able to make those meetings. Great, and that's all of our data. So monitors, we want to thank you so much for the hours you put in, the heart that you have, the expertise that you've developed, the questions you ask. We couldn't do any of this without you, and all this data was a result of your kind hearts and your good service. So a round of applause for you. And with that said, monitors and people just popping in, are there any questions, anything you'd like to share while we're still here? Oh, and before that, if you have to leave quickly, this is a good time to do so. If you would like this PowerPoint emailed to you, please drop your email in the chat down below, or you can just PM it to one of us with a direct message in the chat. We'll make sure to get that to you. But with that said, I can open it back up.
I don't have any real question to ask. I feel like I ought to be a cheerleader for your programs and communicate to other people who are maybe dabbling in this that I've made several forest preserves kind of my little home patch. And when you visit these places over and over again during the summer, you get to know them really well, and you get to see the patterns of the way the plants and the animals and the insects and the birds ebb and flow throughout the season. It's a real learning experience, and it's kind of an adventure every time you go out, because you never know what you're going to find. It's always a little bit of an expedition into the unknown. And I go out and I look for a wide variety of stuff all at once. If I go out at night for bats, I'm also listening for frogs, and I'm listening for nighttime birds. If I go out during the day, I'm looking for bumblebees and butterflies and dragonflies all at once. And I may be doing that at the same time as I'm monitoring for bluebirds. So you can combine a lot of these things together, and you can make a forest preserve your own. And to me, that's very rewarding. And anybody who's just thinking about getting into it, go for it. Go for it and do it and try it for a year. It's to me a very rewarding experience.
Well, I'm so glad we got that on recording. That can be our new slogan, our new pitch.
Dang, I should have set it to music.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Barbara.
Sure. Come on, Joyce, jump in.
Oh my gosh, this has been doing this monitoring, being in the forest reserves for the last 5 years, 6 years, meeting all these wonderful people. What a great experience. I've learned so much. I feel like I've been giving talks. I did a master naturalist at their annual report or annual meeting. I did a presentation on dragonflies. I never would have been able to do that if I hadn't been volunteering for the Forest Preserve District and learning as I went. So it's just opened up so many doors, and the best part is just the people I've met. So yeah, anybody who's interested, I say go for it.
And it's been a wonderful thing to do this summer when you have to stay distant from other people. I've been out in the field a couple times this summer with Joyce. And if you're both swinging your insect nets, you have to kind of stay apart from each other anyway.
Exactly.
But out in the field, it's been very easy. You kind of shout to each other about what you're finding and what you're seeing and who's going where, and you're socially separated anyway. So it's being outdoors in these circumstances has been it's worked very well. It works very smoothly. It's a real it's been a real lifesaver, I think, for a lot of people to be able to go out and do this stuff in the time of coronavirus.
And every visit, it's a different. You never know what you're going to see. I mean,
that's right. That's right.
One day, walking along the path, all of a sudden, a Blandings turtle shows up. I mean, you just never know.
Yeah. Yeah, I've often told people that if you're sitting in your living room, you know what you're going to see. But if you're out in the forest preserves, you don't know. I mean, anything could happen or nothing could happen. It's always a surprise.
Yeah. Right.
So it's fun.
Yep.
I think an underlooked benefit of community science too is that it develops experts in the community, like so many of you here, and that in turn isolates organizations from some of the negative effects of change, especially staff changes. It's good for me as a newcomer to this field to have experts to consult, and people who continue to monitor species and forest preserves over time, regardless of who employees may be. And that information and that connection to the land is so valuable, and it helps with organizations transitioning and just the broader nature community as a whole. So it's good that the experts aren't just the people on payrolls too. Although you all deserve $1 million for all of your hard work.
Hey, bring it on.
Oh, well.
Well, thank you.
One thing I'd like to share is I've absolutely loved getting to be in this position. I've learned so much on the job, which is awesome. And I started the community science portion of this AmeriCorps term in April and will be ending in December. And early next spring, probably in April, that AmeriCorps position will be open again. And so if any of you happen to know someone who's between the ages of 20 and 100 years old and has at least some college experience and an interest in nature in the forest preserves of Winnebago County, they can keep their eye out for this position through Severson Dells and through AmeriCorps.
Good.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone again for coming. You're welcome to hang out and linger as much as you would like to. If you feel like you need to hop off, you are more than welcome to, but we're so glad that you came, and hopefully you learned a little bit, and hopefully if you're new, we'll be in touch about maybe ways you can try this whole thing for yourself and see if it's a good match for you.